Hi, I'm Matt and welcome to my shop. Today I'm going to start on part 2 of the Tram Tool build. Bit of a tongue twister there. So before I get too far into it, I made a few mistakes in the last video, so I want to address that now before we get into it. One of them I mentioned during the video, and that was when I was doing the rotation cut. I was cutting with this end mill, and let me see if I can bring this up closer. I was cutting all the way up near the top of this. I've got it upside down obviously, but really close to the holder. But the flutes on this don't go all the way up there. They stop a little bit short of that. It looks like flute, but it's not. It's not sharpened way up there. So that caused a little bit of an issue the first time I went around. That's why I ended up having to back up and recut it, and I did it in 2 levels. So I just wanted to mention that. That was brought up in the last video. But the other issue I did not bring up because I wasn't aware of it at the time. And unfortunately, it was a critical mistake. And it was early on. Most of this came out good, and I was pretty happy with the way it went until I started the second episode last week. Well, I started setting up for it. I didn't get very far. Turns out I set the wrong angle on this. I got some numbers mixed up, and it's just a stupid mistake. I should have caught it. Basically, I was trying to remember the numbers. I thought I remembered it, and I got it jumbled up with another number on the page that I was looking at. Basically, the whole lesson here is always double check your stuff. I didn't, and it cost me. I had to redo this. So this one, I'll use what's left of this to make something else that's smaller. I try not to waste anything that I don't have to. But I spent that last weekend. That was going to be this episode, and I remade that. It went a lot quicker because I wasn't filming with the camera. And honestly, it came out a lot, besides fixing the issue, and you can see the difference in the angle here. It changes the way everything lines up, and that's how I knew something was wrong. When I started setting up to do, actually it was this cut here. I had just flipped it over and I was starting to cut that, and once I started cutting into it, I could see it wasn't right. Things just weren't lining up the way they should. So this is complete, and I don't know if you can see it, just the finish and stuff came out better because I learned from my mistake with this, so I didn't smear the top like I did the first time, this little bit here. So I think we're ready now. We'll be continuing with this one instead of the one we did in the last episode. It was the same process. There really wasn't a lot different other than the angle. I did drill this one through, and I did manage to do it from the first position. Okay, so in the last episode, I was going to drill it with this drill bit, and when I realized I didn't have enough room, it was because I was going to use the collet and just grab onto the stem here like you normally do on a drill bit that has that step. And that it was too long to do that. What I ended up doing instead is, it's a bit unethical. You're not supposed to do it this way. But I ended up using a larger collet and biting down on the shank up here. But there's only about 5/8 of smooth surface there. So I was actually going up into the fluted part of the drill bit, which is not great because if it spins it can damage your collet. But in order to get that hole drilled, and I really wanted it done on the first side because it's more accurate to do it that way, I decided to take the chance on it, and it did work out. I didn't have any trouble with it spinning in there, and the hole did come out good. I don't know if you can see that in there, but everything lined up the way it should. So now when I do the other side, that hole is already there. I know where the center of it is when I go to do, because there's going to be another recess like I did here. There'll be one on the back side, and I'll have everything there to find it just right. So with that, I just wanted to be upfront with it that we are starting on a different part, and let's get to it. So I need to set this up so that this surface and this surface are level with the vise. That's not enough to guide it just by that. So I'm going to be using a 1, 2, 3 block here, and I'm going to be using gauge blocks on top of this. And I already have in my drawings the difference between this and this going straight up or perpendicular to that surface. And I know this is 3 inches going up like this, and I can measure that out with the gauge blocks. So here we have our gauge blocks, and we just stack these up, and these are actually kind of stuck together. If you're not familiar with it, it's called ringing, and they're so flat that when you, well, let me take them off. You press it on and you kind of squeeze and turn it, and it squeezes all the air out, and the contact on that is so close that the metals actually stick to each other just a little bit. They'll even hold upside down. So I've got a 0.95 inch, a 0.1 inch, and a 0.109 inch. So I did my calculations. I went from metric over to inches, and I come up with a total of 3,159 and a little bit of change. I've got 3 inches, well, because I've got a 1, 2, 3 block laying flat there. That 1, 2, 3 block is only bringing it up 2 inches from one end to the other. You're going from 1 inch to 3 inch, and it's 2 inches difference. So I need to make up the rest with gauge blocks. So what I've done here, just to be sure, I've taken each of these and I've subtracted it from my final figure here, and I come back to the 2 inches of raise that is there from the 1, 2, 3 block. So I know that this is correct. And everything looks good. It looks nice and flat there. So this 1, 2, 3 block is just so that the vise can squeeze in on there when I've got that one that's laying flat. And I already know that this is just a little bit thicker than the 1 inch that is its main designation. And once this is all tight, I'm going to take out my gauge blocks because I really don't want to mill with them in place there. So I've got the table all the way down. I don't have clearance to get all the way to the top, but I don't need to because I'm only going to have ½ an inch left over the top of this. So I'll deck this off where I'm at right now, and then I'll measure the thickness, and from there I'll know how much I need to go to get it down to the finished height, and we'll set that from the DRL. I'll set my target in there. Okay, so we got this decked off now. So let's see, this is upside down. We're looking at it from the other side, so now I can't get the paper oriented because this is facing the other way. But this part here is going to be over here. This here is what we just cut, that top surface there. So now I want to get this part down here. But before I can do that, I need to probe and find my X. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to touch off on this end here, which would be this here. And that is, see, 107 and 40, so 147 millimeter from there to the center of the hole. So that'll give me a reference that I can work with at that point. So I'll put 0 back here, which is the rotation axis of this tool. And then from there, I can work my step over for this. From the center of the hole, I'm going to cut back. It's 12.7 millimeter. And this is a 3/4 end mill, so I got to move over an extra 1/8 from the center, 1/8 of an inch. I'll have to switch the inches, and that'll give me my cut point. And let's see, the height, it's basically going to be right at the bottom of this, I think. I got to measure here. No, I should be able to just do a drop from that surface there and drop down, and that will give me that depth. So because I have to take this out to use my probe, I can't use the Z height that I have programmed in here. So what I will be doing is I'll do the same process I did here, where I take a light cut first, or a cut that's in a zone that I know I can remove for sure. And I'll measure the distance from the 1, 2, 3 block at the bottom to that, and know what to set in the DRO so I can hit my mark here. Got just barely enough room to hit that. I'm all the way down again. Okay, so I have that entered in on the DRO. I'm just going to do a check to verify that I'm there. It went in the hole. It could be an illusion from the slope, but it does look slightly off. Not by much, but I'm going to double check it. I'm actually going to go side to side in there and touch inside the hole as a double verification. So I did end up with a discrepancy here, and I think what happened is I hit a burr out here when I tried to measure from this end. This is the pivot point of the tool, so I'm going to consider this the accurate measurement. I'm going to split the difference between on X from that side to this side on touching the inside of the hole. That's what I'll take as the center, because that'll give me a break in the middle of the hole there. So right now I have the end mill is centered directly over the center of the rotation axis on the part and the x-axis. So now I'm going to switch the inches here and come back 1/8 inch. Okay, so that should be it there. And I gotta walk the table on this. Measuring down the side would be a little difficult. Yeah, I don't have a good shot to go around the outside to measure the height here from the 1, 2, 3 block, because of the way this angle comes in and I'm squeezed in with this 1, 2, 3 block here. But I have the hole here and that lands on top of the 1, 2, 3 block. So I'm just going to do a depth gauge with the verniers through the hole, and that'll give me the height. Just got to blast the chips out of the bottom of it. I got a spot there I can hit. There's still some in, but I can avoid it. I got 63.5 millimeter. So I've got my Z height set here, but I ran into a problem, and that is that the height that I need to cut this down to is about 1 millimeter below the 1, 2, 3 block. I need to get that out, but I need to do it without moving this. Otherwise I gotta go back and refine everything. I think what I'm gonna do, because this is set up, that face back here, where it goes vertical, was cut with this in this position. So I think I'm gonna run the end mill in there and make sure that I'm touching that, and that'll give me a reference for Z that it's not going to shift back, and the height's not going to change because of the 1, 2, 3 block down here. Once I do that, I can loosen the vise a little bit, slide this 1, 2, 3 block back out of the cut zone, and retighten it. Just make sure I'm butted up against the end mill, and I should be good with that. So I did get the 1, 2, 3 block out of the way now. Everything is in position. I did use the gauge blocks here again just to make sure that didn't settle while I was in the process. So we're still level, and we should be ready to cut. have our cut done here, and next I need to do the counter bore, which is this end mill here, the 3/4 inch, and it needs to drop down 10 millimeter. Unfortunately, I forgot about this step being next. I should have zeroed out the y-axis, touched both sides and done my half with the indicator that I have. I didn't do that, so I'm going to have to take this tool out, get centered, and come back. Actually, wait a minute. This is coming out up here. I'm just going to touch off with that and get it centered that way. If I stay up in this region, I don't have to worry about any marks because that's getting cut off anyways in a later operation. So why don't we do that, because that way I can preserve my Z height and I'll be able to know exactly how far I'm going down. That should put my 0 on center. Check that just a minute. Okay, so that does appear to be center. So now I'm going to put X back on 0. So I went to incremental on the DRO and I set this as 0 on the incremental setting. So now it'd be easy just to go drop it down till I get to -10 and then that'll be done. Here I'm aligning the part and the vise in preparation to cut the curved sweep on the end of the part where the indicator goes in. The x-axis is already established by the vise, and I'm using a drill bit and the quill to set the y-axis. This will get a full center for the sweep. So I'm using the 1, 2, 3 block to get it level on that underside surface just by pressing down. And the drill bit's going to take care of my Y. Doing it this way was much quicker and easier than indicating with having to rotate the vise like I did in the first sweeps on the other end of the tool. Unfortunately, the video for that cut did not record, but it is essentially the same operation that I did at the beginning of this video where I cut the opposite end. So now I have the horizontal set up, and I ended up going with this bigger one that's 1/8. It's a little wider slot than what I want, but I think it's acceptable. Problem was that the 3-inch one that was a real thin one, I could not reach deep enough to do the cut that I wanted. It would cut through the first part here, but I want the slot to extend back to it hits the back of that curve that's cut on the other side of this. This one has plenty of clearance, so it'll work do the job. So now I gotta get this centered on here on the y-axis. I'll probably use the paper method here and just touch it. And once we get it centered, then we'll be ready to do the cut. I'll have to raise the table a little bit here. And where this has enough teeth to cover across there with more than one, I don't think I even need it running. I can just bring it up with it stationary, move the paper, and I'll know when it touches. So I'm going to run this 465 RPM on this, is what the dial computer says. So in a second look, I was able to get it centered with the shaft on the height because the vise is not going to go all the way under. Stopping so I can zero my X so I know how deep I'm going. does it. So I think that wraps up what I'm going to do for today. I'm going to do the curved parts in another session, but I'm pretty happy with how this came out. This time I got it right instead of having that angle wrong. Things are looking the way they're supposed to. That's our top view, and that's the part where we did the sweep today. So that would be that right there, which I think came out good. It's supposed to match that. That's the back we did the other day on the previous episode. The counter bore from the previous episode. And the one we did today, this cut today, and cut the bottom and the slot. So next we'll be doing those sweeps. And while we're here, I'm going to show how this hooks up. So I'm going to use this bolt. We'll go in from the bottom here, like that. And on the top, I'm going to make a post 3/4 inch that goes up into the spindle, the ER32 call it. It'll have a little shoulder that sits on this aluminum out here, and then the 3/4 inch diameter, 10 millimeter down, will go into that counter bore, similar to the way that that head goes in on the bottom side here, like that. So they'll squeeze this together nice and tight and hold it secure. And I think once that's done, I think this will do the job. Might as well show this along here. So that's our dial indicator. That's going to go in like that. Now I did have one disappointment on the dial indicator. It's not a big deal, but when I measured things I didn't notice this. The plunger on this is a little bit eccentric to the diameter of the indicator, but it still works. It was a little more gap here than what I initially intended. My thoughts were to have it centered on here, but if it was centered, I'd be able to rotate it in any direction I wanted as far as where it starts. But with this the way it is, I'm probably just going to clamp it down with it at the furthest out position and leave it at that. Because this does allow you to move it, the dial like that, but the needle will always be oriented with the base according to how far in it goes. Nothing I can do about that. It's just the way it is. But I think this will be way more than adequate for the job that I want to do. I intended it to be a little bit overkill. This is not for practicality the way that I built this. There are much simpler designs that would work almost equally as well. But for me, this was a chance to practice and learn and try out some new processes with the turntable that I've never done before. I made a few mistakes along the way. We did get that first one I had to redo that first day, but I learned. I think I learned a good bit during this and still have a little bit to go. When I do these sweeps, there's going to be more to learn there. But that's all half of what this is about. It's, if I can teach you something as I learn, that's kind of the goal of what this channel is. So anyways, that wraps it up for today, and thanks for watching. If you've made it this far, I hope you've enjoyed watching this video and found it entertaining or educational. If so, please consider hitting like or subscribe. It does help give me incentive to continue producing more. Thank you.